Welcome to the ARC MMA. In this video, you will learn how to prepare a sample for and collect data on our Agilent 6230 time-of-flight mass spectrometer system using direct analysis in real time, or DART, as the ionization method.
One of the biggest advantages of DART is its minimal sample prep requirements. If your sample is soluble, we recommend dissolving it in your volatile solvent of choice before arriving at the MMA. For best results, target an approximate concentration of 50 micrograms per milliliter or less, so as not to overload the sample card. When you get to the instrument, check to make sure the DART source is installed on the TOF. If there is a different source, do not attempt to switch it yourself. To prep your DART sample for analysis, you will need your sample, open spot cards, 5 microliter capillary pipettes if your sample is dissolved, a glass rod if your sample is solid powder, or tweezers if you are analyzing the surface of a solid object, Kim wipes, calibrant, and lastly gloves. For this demonstration, we will be running a sample of 10 micrograms per milliliter caffeine. Place an open spot card on a clean Kim wipe. Then, if your sample is soluble, use a capillary pipette to draw up some of your sample, and tap the capillary pipette on the middle of the grid to coat the grid with your sample. Let your sample air dry. If your sample is insoluble, you can use the tip of a glass rod to place some of your powdered sample on the open spot card grid. If you are using DART to measure directly from the surface of a solid material, you can either try mounting your sample to an open spot card, or you may need to use tweezers to hold your sample in the plasma beam. Never use your fingers, as the plasma beam is extremely hot. You will also need a card spotted with calibrant for your sample. For positive mode, use Jeffamine, and for negative mode, use Fomblin Y. These calibrants are provided by the MMA and will be located with the rest of the DART supplies. If you have multiple samples, you can run the same calibrant card multiple times as long as the spectrum for the calibrant still looks good. When your sample and calibrant cards are dry, you are ready to run your samples. The first thing we are going to do now is check that the DART source is on standby and at the correct temperature. If the DART controller webpage is not up on Chrome when you arrive at the computer, either click the bookmark labeled DART or type 192.168.10.111 in the URL bar. Once at the DART controller page, confirm that the DART is in standby and set to 250 degrees Celsius. This is an appropriate temperature for many samples, but you may need to increase the temperature if your sample doesn't ionize at 250. Do not exceed 500 degrees Celsius. Now is a good time to change the temperature, but leave the DART on standby until you are ready to run. Next, we are going to set up our sample run work list using Agilent Mass Hunter data acquisition. The best way to do this is to start from a recent DART work list or the provided DART blank work list. If you use a pre-saved work list, please save as a new work list before you make any changes to the old one.
Today's work list will be called 2021-12-14-MMA_DART_training.
Your work list should be saved in the work list folder, starting with the date in the YYYYMMDD format. For the caffeine sample I am running today, I will enter the sample name and correct method. There are only 2 methods for the DART, one for positive mode and one for negative mode. Next, specify your data directory and file name. It is good to keep track of your sample runs by specifying a run number each time. This prevents overwriting of experimental data by the software. To add more samples with the same parameters, select a row, right-click, and select Copy Row. Then right-click and select Add Copied Row. That row will be added to the bottom of the work list. Once you are done making changes to your work list, save it. If you make any further changes, save it again. The software does not autosave work lists. When all of your samples are entered into your work list, we can now return to the DART controller software and set the DART to run mode. At this time, make sure you have the correct polarity selected to match the method you are using. Return to the data acquisition software and check only the box of the sample that you would like to run now. You can only run one sample at a time. Click the black play button to turn on the instrument. After a few seconds, it will switch to run mode and data acquisition will start. Starting with the calibrant card, slide it into the DART source for a second or two. You should observe calibrant peaks appearing nearly instantly in the mass spectrum. As it is running, you can observe the progress by monitoring the tick and BPC. The tick is the total ion chromatogram, which is the sum of all the ions in the mass spectrum. The BPC is the base peak chromatogram, which is the intensity of the current most abundant ion in the mass spectrum. You should see a prominent peak in both the tick and BPC for the calibrant. Wait at least 10 seconds or until both of these chromatograms have returned to baseline to run your sample. Insert your sample into the DART source for just a second or two. If your sample has ionized well, you'll observe a sharp peak in the tick and BPC. Once your sample has run, hit the red Stop button above the work list to end data acquisition. Your data is automatically saved. If you have more samples, uncheck the sample you just ran, check the next sample in the work list, and hit the play button to start the next acquisition and repeat the procedure. If you want to rerun any samples, we suggest inserting a new row into your work list and incrementing the run number for your sample file name. Remember to save your work list after any changes. When you are done acquiring data, click the Off button in MassHunter Data Acquisition to put the instrument on standby. Go back to the DART controller software and place the DART source on standby. This will automatically switch the gas source to nitrogen. We have a limited supply of helium gas, so switching the DART to standby is very important. Many instruments in the MMA rely on helium to run properly, so if the DART is left in run mode unchecked, it can damage other instruments if it were to empty the helium tanks. Never turn it off while the heater is running. This can damage the source. If you have changed the temperature, please return it to 250 degrees Celsius. Throw away used DART sample cards, gloves, and chem wipes in the trash. Do not put these in the recycling. Used capillaries must go in the glass waste, and wiped off glass rods can go in the dishes bin next to the sink.
Now you know how to prepare a sample for and operate the Agilent 6230 time-of-flight mass spectrometer using direct analysis in real time. Please be aware that you are not a fully trained user until you take an in-person proficiency test with an ARC MMA staff member. To learn how to analyze your data, please watch our video on data processing using MassHunter qualitative analysis. Thanks for joining us for training, and see you in lab soon.